Hello, everybody. This is Scott Kiloby. I am a teacher and an author and one of the co-owners of the Kiloby Center for Recovery, where we treat addiction and mental health issues. With me is my co-owner, Julianne. Hi, Julianne.
Hello, co-owner and clinical director at the Kiloby Center.
And much more. She's been training people with me for almost 15 years. She's like the trainer of the trainers. So you're a really integral part of this work. And this is why it's good for us to talk about this, because we've been at it a long time, with working with people really all over the world. And I wanted to say it. The reason that we're doing this is for World Mental Health Day, which is October 10th, coming up here. And I was looking up this morning exactly what the purpose of it. It's about raising awareness and education, but also about reducing stigma around mental health issues, including addiction. So I want to start there, Julianne. I think that's a big topic to start with. This is stigma. It's changed, since when we first opened up the Kiloby Center. I think it has gotten better because there's more public awareness about the stigma, but it's still there. You want to talk about that and the kind of stigma that we find with families and clients that come to the Kiloby Center and how we work with that?
Yeah, I still think there is a lot of stigma around, mental health issues and addiction in particular, because families, and not just families, but generally there's a belief that it's their fault. They've done something wrong. It's not something that it is something that they can control and that they should control it, but they're not controlling it. And there's also an avoidance, right? There's an avoidance of people just generally, even in the public, like, oh, there's something wrong with them. It's, if they see someone with mental health issues out on the street, people don't want to be near that. They don't want to be around that. And there's something, it's very different than somebody with physical health issues, right? Very different, as though they had more control over it. And so, yeah, we see a lot of that at the center. A lot of families don't want to join the family program because they think it's their family members' problem, not theirs, when it really is a family issue because it affects everybody in the family.
It does. And, that reminds me also, like, if you listen to the way people talk, like when they're at dinner, people generally, I mean, not everybody talks about their health issues, but they're much more open to talk about their physical health issues, to say, my doctor diagnosed me with arthritis the other day. But how often do you hear people being that open about their mental health issues? Have you noticed that just generally in our culture?
They don't, because there's so much shame involved in it, right? There's that stigma and shame. And so we don't talk about things that we're ashamed of.
Right. So I think this is good to have a World Mental Health Day and just talking about this. And there's a lot of people talking about reducing the stigma. That's certainly in the public awareness, even if the stigma is still there. We're talking about it. And I think one of the things to talk about is just the roles of people in the family, like someone who may have a mental health issue and then the loved ones around them, because the stigma is not just cultural, it's in families. And so let's just start with that, because one thing is being able to detect or discover that there may be an issue within yourself. But even before you let anybody else know where the stigma might attach, what are some ways that you see that people can start to become aware that there may be something that they need help for, beyond just the kind of whatever that means, the normal stressors of life, something else that may need attention? What would you say about that?
You mean the person themselves who's experiencing the mental health?
Yeah.
I think if they can just start to notice, are they relying on a substance too much to avoid feeling something, or some other compulsive behavior? Are they just feeling a lot of anger inside themselves? Are they projecting out onto other people? It's their fault. They're the reason for I'm so mad because of them. They did something. And so a lot of people project onto somebody. We all do that, right? We all do that to some degree or another. Are they unhappy in their relationships? Are they having relationship problems? Are they doing things to avoid feeling, whatever it is that is happening for them? Those are the main ways that I see. I'm sure you can think of some others, Scott.
No, I would say all of those. The other thing that comes up, because we do so much work with emotions and emotional repression, is like, what is my relationship to emotions? Because we all have challenging situations in life. Like, if you live on Earth, you're going to have reactions and responses and stresses and traumas coming up. But I guess my question is, or we're trying to clarify, is when does that become, when does it cross over the line where one needs help then? And I would, for me, it's like, well, we can't avoid the emotions and we wouldn't want to. So life is going to happen. We're going to get stressed out and triggered. But what is my relationship to my emotions? Going back with me, I've shared publicly that I had chronic pain, and then to come to find out, it looked like a physical issue, and come to find out it was partly a mental health issue with the emotional repression. And so that was how I was relating to emotion, the habit of repressing that. And so I can think a lot of people could probably, yeah, say something about that as just our relationship to emotion, how that might be an indicator.
Yeah, that resistance is my favorite topic
Yeah.
because I really think it's the core of all suffering, just resisting, not allowing whatever it is that we're experiencing in our internal experience. And that is, so we repress fear, we repress anger, we repress sadness, we repress grief, like even just not even allowing ourselves to feel grief. And we don't talk about it, and we don't even allow ourselves to feel it. And I think that is, I also have health issues, as you know, and as many people know. And yes, there's so much of that at the core of that. So there may be partly that's physical, and that emotional repression work is so important because we're not even aware. It's often so unconscious how we just push down and avoid. Even when we're doing inquiry sessions with people, we see it, but we can bring awareness to it. Like, what am I not wanting to feel right now? What am I not wanting to see? What am I not wanting to look at right now? And then also noticing that sense of avoidance or trying to push something away, if we can allow that too, and just be aware of that and explore it. Because there's a whole lot of thought patterns going on in there about what we think is going to happen if we actually just feel something. And it usually never happens. Once we see that, then it's easier to start feeling.
Yeah. And, I feel like we should clarify that when we say feel feelings, what we mean, I think, in this work is coming down and really feeling them, like being present to them and just letting them be there. Because I think a lot of people might listen to this, or some people might listen and say, well, I do feel feelings all the time. We all do, unless we're repressing them. But it's our relationship to them. And that gets into our work, which you got involved with many years ago. And I think one of the reasons that you liked it is because you could relate differently to feelings. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like how we do it maybe differently than people in our culture talk about feelings or being with feelings.
Yeah. So, that goes right back to the Velcro effect. So I can talk a little bit about that. So the way we work with really anything in our internal experiences is we break everything down into thoughts, which are words or pictures, and then body energies, which are emotions or sensations. So our work unvelcros, we call it the Velcro effect, and we unvelcro the thoughts from the pictures, from the body energies, and that's where the freedom lies. But we unvelcro it not to avoid it, we unvelcro by feeling it, right? So what is my relationship to what I'm feeling or thinking or seeing or experiencing right now? And if there's any resistance to that, that's also thoughts, words or pictures or body energies. So it's really that whole process of seeing and not avoiding, like facing directly the things that we don't want to face. Right. And so that we have to look at what is my relationship to this moment, to what am I experiencing in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, and that was big for me when I first recognized that you could just come down and feel something. Because as I think about people listening to this, they may still be kind of where you and I were before we got into these modalities where, yeah, we're feeling all the time, or there's too much feeling or something, but it's really how we're relating to it. And and then you and I know we've seen so many times during the years where someone will come to us with an issue, and the issue gets resolved or begins to get resolved exactly when they start coming down to feel it. So a lot of our work is just coaching people to do that. And it's not the be all end all. It's not like that's the only thing you have to do, but it seems so important for good mental health, as far as I can tell. And then, if we're repressing something, that's a different thing. And so let me ask you just to give a little bit more of your personal story with this work, how it kind of helped you relate differently to your stories and your emotions. And I'll give a little bit of mine so people can hear that we've benefited, not just people that we help.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even realize how much I was avoiding what I was feeling. right? I just thought I was a normal, unhappy, suffering person, right? And then when we started doing this work, I started to see, and this whole Velcro effect thing just was brilliant to me, because I could start to see how my thoughts were impacting my emotions, and I was believing those thoughts. So for me, it was a lot of health issues. I have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. And in the early days, especially Scott, when you and I were working, it was a lot of my victim stories around it. Like, what is wrong with me? This shouldn't be happening. How am I going to support myself because I can't work? Like this whole slew of beliefs around being sick, and this shouldn't have happened, and a lot of victim mentality around it. And the inquiries really helped me with that. But I think even more than that, I mean, I feel like I've had anxiety my whole life, always felt like I was never good enough, never would be good enough. That's the one Enneagram type that I am. And this work has really just helped relax those stories. Of course, we've been doing it for a long time, but it can still show up, but it doesn't stay anymore. It's like I can just be aware of, like, oh, there's that belief again. We just take a moment to really just sit with it. And then I see that it's not true and it passes, and then I can be present again.
Yeah.
For me, this work is not, it's not where you go to therapy and you go for a year, you go for 1 week at a time for a certain amount of time and it's done. It's a lifestyle. Like this is a tool that I'm going to have for the rest of my life, no matter what happens.
Yeah, and that reminds me, well, not to get in too quickly, because what we do at the Kiloby Center, I think, is unique, is that we're trying to empower people to do this work on their own so they'll have it for life. And I think that's really powerful when it comes to mental health, because we all have to sort of take care of ourselves. And if I give my power away over to somebody, I mean, obviously we need a therapist sometimes or a facilitator, but part of the power is being able to do this work on my own. Have you found that too, that that's different than other things?
100%. Yeah, for me, it's always been easy to do on my own because I was determined to. Like, I don't want to wait a week till somebody's available to give me a session. I'm feeling this right now. I have to deal with this right now. And so I've always been able to do that. And yes, we do a lot of education at the Kiloby Center. And even online, we have courses, you have courses, and I have courses to help people self-facilitate so that they have these tools.
Yeah. You mentioned the victim mentality that comes in when people have, or other identities that come in when people have mental health issues. But one thing I want to talk about is just the diagnoses, because in our field, we have, like, when we work with people online, that's in the spiritual domain, so to speak. It's not a clinical thing. So we don't diagnose, and therefore we don't treat, because we're not diagnosing, we're not treating anything. But the Kiloby Center, we have to diagnose. We're a licensed facility. And I suppose there's pros and cons to that, diagnosing and treating. But I want to talk about some of the pros are that you might be able to get treatment once you're diagnosed, something that helps. There's a good thing. I think, can you talk a little bit about not only that maybe you've seen in yourself, but many of your clients even, where the diagnosis becomes part of the suffering and contributes to the feeling of there's something wrong with me, and the identities.
Right. So what we see a lot is if someone has a diagnosis of a personality disorder, say, or depression or anxiety, or even, are labeled alcoholic. Once they take on that label as an identity, they believe that, right? And they often feel that there's no way out. I'm always going to be this, right? There's no help for me. Even though there may be help, I'm always going to be an alcoholic, or I'm always going to have this personality disorder or this depression or this anxiety. And so that just keeps them in that cycle of suffering, right? They don't see any way out. And if they believe that, it's not going to help them. So that's why the inquiry work, I think, can help with that, undo those deficiency stories, those identities that we're so attached to. I was attached to being a victim. Like we talk about utility. What did I get something out of being a victim, right? Or I may get something out of being an alcoholic, or being, having some mental health disorder. There might be an unconscious, of course, benefit, secondary gain to holding on to those beliefs. But this process is very freeing in that it can unhook those beliefs, and then we can just live life more freely.
That also occurs to me that some people might be listening and thinking, well, I definitely need the diagnosis, or I need to really think of myself that in order to heal. But it hasn't been my experience that that's necessary. Like we hear a diagnosis and we should probably use our mind to find out about that, like learn about that. But at the same time, I don't know that we need to identify with that strongly in order to heal, because when you think about like depression, just that clinical phrase, but it doesn't really tell us what the person's believing, or what, it doesn't tell us anything about the relationship to feelings. It's just depression. But when we go into inquiry, we find, for example, something happened when they were a kid, some trauma, a deficiency story, or other programs they're believing. And that's why I think we don't need the diagnosis in the end, because when it comes down to it, it's about these stories and about these traumas that haven't been processed. And that's what I found is I don't need the addict label in order to work on addiction, is what I'm saying, or I don't need the.
Yeah,
So how do you feel about that?
I agree with that. I do think that in some cases, it can be helpful to get an initial diagnosis because now you know what to work with, right? And we can look at the drivers, we can work with the drivers of that and not be identified with that label. But I'm thinking in terms of my own health issues, when I got diagnosed with something, at the time they thought it was EDS, which it turned out not to be, but I actually felt relief because I thought I was going crazy. Like I did not know what was happening to me physically. The fatigue and the brain fog and the pain was just so immense. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. So having a diagnosis that told me there is actually something else going on here, that actually helped me. I also knew, though, I'm one of those people that's like, okay, great. Now I know, now I have something to work with, right? Because I knew that like I was not going to live the rest of my life that way. I was determined that I was going to get through this. And I for pretty much have for the most part. So I think in some cases it can be helpful to a certain extent, but if we hold on to that, that's when it becomes harmful.
Yes, I agree with that completely. It's not all or nothing with these things. It's helpful, and
Yeah.
then at a certain point, it's not. Before I talk about what we do at the Kiloby Center, I think there's some interesting developments in our work, the Kiloby inquiries around the emotional repression and unresolved trauma as it applies to our physical conditions. With mine was chronic pain, and I know you're working with yours. And I know that we are starting to work with that at the Kiloby Center, and that's a very exciting, like, new area. And I don't think a lot of people are even sort of tuned in yet to it. Some are. So for those people who might be considering to come to us but they don't have an addiction, maybe they recognize that there's an illness or chronic pain or something that has potentially a emotional root. Um, yeah, just talk a little bit about that in terms of your own life and how that's helped with any of the so-called physical things.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been working a lot with these repression inquiries lately, and it's been really great. And so here's what I've noticed, like repressed anger is a big one for just about everybody, including me.
Hmm.
And I've been working with that. And as I work with that, I feel lighter. My whole being feels lighter and more open and more present.
Mm.
What I found for me, it wasn't touching the physical pain. Because what I found underneath the anger was hurt, emotional
Mm.
hurt that I couldn't express. Like it was not safe to tell parents or whoever that like they hurt my feelings. I couldn't say that
Yeah.
as a child, right? And so that hurt just kept getting stored in the body. And so I thought it was interesting, the metaphor of, the emotional hurt, and now I have the physical hurt, pain. So I've been
Yes.
working with that. In fact, I had a session last night with a facilitator that went really well, and definitely saw the pain levels go down during that session, just processing, like I'm able to feel and express my hurt, or I'm able to feel and express my anger. That's a reverse inquiry. So I just want to clarify that we're not trying to use an affirmation to create that. We're just looking at all the ways that I feel like I can't, and using this process, Kiloby inquiries process, to unhook those beliefs and those stories.
Yeah. So I talk a lot about anger repression being one of the big things that helped
Yeah.
me with my pain. But to be honest with you, I had the same experience with you. It wasn't just that. There were just like commands when I was a little kid. I would call them, of like, get away, get safe, just really strong commands that were creating pain. And then the hurt. I had the same insight that it was ironic that I couldn't express my hurt. And so it's like I'm hurting myself. The pain just kept hurting. So it's been amazing to me to see how connected the physical is to the emotional side. I think I've learned that more than ever in the last 5 years. I think you've kind of always known that, but we're just developing it now, and it's kind of
Yeah,
exciting. It's the point. Yeah.
yeah.
Can you, for those of you, those of us out there, those of people out there listening who don't know about the Kiloby Center, because we are the first primarily mindfulness center, but it's really more than that. It's self-inquiry. How, in your own words, how would you explain how we're different than other mental health and or addiction treatment facilities out there?
Think we're different in a lot of ways, both structurally, what our program is like, and then in work, the actual work that we do. So at the Kiloby Center, it's not just group work, and it's not just about stopping a substance. It's what are the drivers? We often, when clients come to us, we don't even start with working on their substance. We work on the drivers. How did you feel as a kid? What were your traumas as a kid? What hurt you as a kid? Was there abuse? Were there other beliefs that you weren't heard, or didn't feel loved or cared for? All of those are drivers of the substance use. So we focus on that first. And we use this, we call it a mindfulness method. It's actually deep inquiry. It's more of an advanced mindfulness where we actually look at all of the beliefs, all of the thoughts, all of the feelings, and work with those. But in our center, you get 3 sessions a week, 3 hour-and-a-half individual sessions per week. And there's group time where we're learning about addiction, we're learning about trauma, we're learning the techniques. There are even groups where later on, once you've had time to, learn the techniques, we'll have peer support groups where you practice with each other, with other clients. So it's really, deeply learning these tools so that when you leave, you have them forever. You'll always be able to do this.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it too. The drivers are a big thing. And it goes back to the diagnoses, because when I came into recovery, I got the diagnosis, you have substance abuse or substance use disorder, you're an addict. And other people come to the center with depression or whatever, but then we all meet at a common ground, which our drivers are often very similar. We all are dealing with either unresolved trauma or deficiency stories, lack, shame, repression. And I like that because then it kind of puts everyone in the same field. Because when we put out these classifications, like you're an addict and you're depressed, and but in the end, what I like about our work is that we do meet in this field where we just meet our suffering, and come to find out that we've all had experiences in the past, in our childhood, that affected us. And that's what I like about that. And you also mentioned, this to me is a big thing. It's like, again, empowering myself to look, empowering others to look by themselves and each other. That's so important. When you think about how big mental health issues are in our culture now, we're becoming so informed of it. How could we possibly not empower people, as best we can? Because it's just so prevalent, and it's with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not just there 1 hour a week for a therapy session. So I love that about our work, that it takes a while for people to learn it and do it,
Yeah.
but they can eventually do that.
Yeah, I
So
totally agree.
here's my last question, Jules. I guess we can't have a conversation like this without talking about the world and what's going on with it, and has been going on for the last couple of years. And everybody's been impacted. I know you've been impacted around COVID and the political stuff that's going on. So this has almost become a cliche, but it's true, is that people are probably suffering perhaps more now than ever, isolated. Their addictions are coming up, their traumas. What advice would you give them right off the top? I mean, I know there's nothing we can say that just cures all that, but what advice would you give them to start taking real steps towards good self-care during this period?
I would say first they have to acknowledge it. First, you have to acknowledge how you're feeling. You have to become aware, right? Like, I'm suffering. I'm afraid. I'm afraid for my family members. I'm afraid for society. I'm afraid for myself in many cases. I'm afraid for what's happening in the world. So I think that has to be acknowledged first and foremost. And then I think everybody has to find a way that works for them to be able to process that, whether it's talking to a friend or a family member who can really listen and not offer advice, just like really hear, because often what we all really just want is to be heard, right? Just let us be ourselves. So find somebody who can really listen to you. And if you need more help, find a therapist, find a facilitator. We have a lot of facilitators online as well. Come to the Kiloby Center, go to a treatment center, like really be willing to accept that there's an issue here. I don't feel okay in my body, in my skin, and take that step to find what works for you to get to that place where you can start to love yourself again.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that that would be the same answer that I would give. The only thing is, I can think of that shame or that stigma thing stopping people, you know. And it's unfortunate because there aren't a lot of modalities. I mean, ours deals with this. There are a couple of them out there, some therapy modalities that help, but sometimes the shame stops us from even getting help. And so, one thing I like about our work is that if you can come and learn a few of the inquiries and just deal with some of the shame or the stigma on the forefront, you might be able to take some steps. So that's another thing I like about our work is because you can learn it on your own, and before you even go and tell everybody everything, you can learn how to process some of those feelings, because it isn't easy to ask for help. And people often think, there's something fundamentally wrong with me now. I'm sick or I'm mentally ill. And all those words that we used to throw around, like he's crazy, he's nuts, he's off his rocker, that kind of thing. All that stigma is there.
Yeah.
So I do like the idea that people can come and learn our work and deal with some of that. I don't think I would give any other advice than what you said, though, because everybody's in a different place, aren't they? So, I mean, I would love to invite people into this work, but that might not be exactly where they want to go first. And so my advice would be, like Julianne said, is take the step that feels right for you. Whatever that is, just take some step towards it, reaching out beyond yourself. All this stuff is going on in the world. And with our work, we see that it all reflects back something towards us. It brings up our presidents, our government, COVID is all bringing up our childhood stuff. So, in the end, I think and I don't want to say it this way, but these kinds of things going on in the world are just a mirror for us in a way. And before this was happening, maybe we didn't, we were kind of, some of us nestled into some comfort and maybe even a little privilege, some of us. And now we're having to look at that and see that we're impacted. So it's not a blessing, but at the same time, the worst suffering in life is also an opportunity, as we all know. Any passing words you want to go ahead?
I just want to say that I love what you just said, because I was going to say, and then I held back, like we're all just reflecting back to each other our fear, our hurt, our anger. That's what's happening in the world right now. So if we can take ownership of that, right? And that's not easy to do, but if we can take ownership of that and say, I'm not okay, I'm afraid, or I'm scared, or I'm angry, or whatever, and then or I'm ashamed to even acknowledge this. I feel vulnerable acknowledging this, right? So taking that first step and just acknowledging it within yourself, and then don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Yeah, and if you need a little work, do some of our inquiries to help you with that. My point is that we do have some work that can help you. Are there any other just passing words at the end here that you want to share with anybody listening about maybe suffering with mental health or family member? Anything else? You want to put you on the spot? Give me a chance here.
I think I would say you're not alone. That's another thing that I see is so many people think I'm the only one who feels this way. When you start talking about it, you'll find that so many people feel the same way. And so take that step, be the brave one, acknowledge that, let people know, step out of that comfort zone, because that's where the real safety is, when we step out of the comfort zone.
Right. This doesn't make sense to the mind at first, but yes,
right.
Absolutely. And the other thing that doesn't make sense is that our suffering is a doorway to freedom. But when you're suffering, it's hard to hear that. But if you look back in your life, especially if you're doing any sort of transformational work, you'll see that the worst times were the catalyst for freedom. And so, there's that.
Right. And there's that saying, the only way out is through.
Yeah.
That could be our motto, right? We have to go through it. We have to face it and go through it. And it's done the way we work with it. It's done in a very safe and gentle way. It's not, nobody's going to force someone to go where they're not able to go. We do it in a very gentle, safe manner.
That's right. Good. Okay. So if anybody's out there and they're interested in coming to the Kiloby Center, we do offer services online. So you can come to our physical location in Rancho Mirage, California, where it's a treatment center. So you expect that you would get treatment with all the documentation, the assessments, and the treatment that go along with that. But we also work online with people. So either way, if you're interested in working with the Kiloby Center, go to kilobyscenter.com. There's a contact form on there, or you can call us through the number there. But some people will not be able to go to treatment, Julianne. So how can they reach you if they want to do sessions or train with you?
Well, my website is inquirewithjulianne.com. So I've got a lot of information out there. And I know yours is, do you want to say what yours is?
Yeah, so mine's kiloby.com. So if you go to hers or mine, what you will do, you wouldn't be in treatment, you'd be doing sessions with us. And we also train people, both of us train people to become certified facilitators of this work, which is called the Kiloby Inquiries. So that's good, they know where to go now.
You know, I also want to add that, Scott, you have a YouTube channel full of videos and recordings explaining this work and covering a lot of topics. So I think that's a place they can go as well. I also have a YouTube channel, Inquire with Julianne, that's got some guided meditations and some other short videos describing some of the techniques and demonstrating them. So find us on YouTube as well.
That's awesome. All right, thanks for being with me, Julianne, and to everyone out there. We love you, and we're here to talk to you and connect with you. If you need us, hang in there.
Thanks.